How did you even get started in this? I mean, were you always like into the arts?
When I got employed, Donna Crouch, who was running the creative team at the time, said to me, "I'm employing you because you're not creative."
Wow.
The creator creates, like it is the way that he reveals himself. He's creating light, sound, color, animals, creating beauty and hiding it everywhere. And then I think he's done that in us. He's created humans to create with beauty that is about to surprise and delight the world. How do we release the creatives to be prophets in society, to paint these pictures of what it looks like to live within the realm of your kingdom? And I imagine a time when the artists are actually just talking about what does it look like to live into God's kingdom.
Do you ever get triggered by the bad experiences and you're just like, oh gosh, I don't want this to happen. I don't want this to happen.
When I get triggered, I think about...
Hey everybody, this is Rita Springer. Thank you for joining me again for the Rita Springer podcast, and Worship is My Weapon. Today I'm so excited to be talking via video with Cass Langton, who is in Sydney, Australia. And Cass and her husband Rich are just some of the most precious creative pastors that I've ever met, and have been part of my inspiration for doing everything that I love to do in the creative. So here we go. We're going to just sit and talk to sweet Cass Langton. I don't know how you and Rich ended up really carrying the heart for the creatives like you do, because in the church, that's a very rare find. So I felt so alone, even at my age, for so long, because nobody was doing it. Nobody was doing it in the normal church anyway. I never saw it done in the small churches outside of, the Easter services or that we'd do some creative stuff. Gateway was probably the first place that I was like, they put on an entire Broadway show? Like that blew my mind. And I would have these long conversations while I was in Gateway or at Gateway with other guys that had been there for a long time, because really the heart was to start a Juilliard there.
Wow.
To start like a Juilliard college and just raise up creatives.
Right.
That was kind of the rumblings in the worship department, because they had the money to do it. But I'd never seen anybody do it. I would just love for you to tell the story. Do you tell the story a lot?
Not really.
Oh,
as in how I ended up doing what we did?
Yeah, like your beginnings. I think the beginnings of people are fascinating anyway. But how did you even get started in this? I mean, when you were a kid, were you always like into the arts, into music, into theater, all that kind of stuff?
I actually call myself a jack of all trades, a master of none. Yeah. I feel like you guys, I look at you all and go, you have superpowers that are amazing. Like you can write and you can lead worship, and like the things that you can do are phenomenal. I learned piano to grade 6. I sang a little bit. I was the guy who was campaigning on every church musical to be allowed to be the lead or be the tap dancer or get involved. And I could see beauty in the church. Like I had such a love for the arts and design and architecture. I did art at school, and if I could have, I would have gone and done that at university. So wow. I always found God in the beauty of the creative world.
Yeah.
Whenever I go see a stage show, I always think I miss my calling. Do you do that?
Yeah. Well, I was in theater for a long time, so I do think I miss my
you didn't miss your calling. But at the same time, I had such a deep love for the Word of God and for pastoring and for discipleship. And I think it was in marrying those two things together that maybe the Lord began to work on me.
Yeah.
My first job at Hillsong Church. So Rich and I got married. We were two starry-eyed kids who just wanted to do church planting, actually. And he had studied in Anglican college. My dad had told me not to do ministry work because I didn't need it. And so I went to go to Bible college, and he's like, you're never going to use that. So I have a business degree.
Wow.
And so ended up in Sydney at Hillsong Church, and we thought we would do 2 years at Hillsong Church, and then we would go plant churches in Denmark or Melbourne.
Were you planning to plant Hillsong churches? Was that the... Just go to the church for 2 years and then go out and plant a church?
The truth was, we had come to Hillsong they were doing a little conference, and we had come to the conference once and had just been ignited on the inside by a kind of church that was alive, and God was doing something there.
Yeah.
And so I think we went, this is amazing. If we could spend a little while here, that would be incredible. And the pastors actually talked about their relationship with Jesus as if it was living. And I think we had come from a fairly conservative Baptist church. There hadn't really been a lot of Holy Spirit or any of that sort of great people. And so we found ourselves in the middle of a culture where worship was just so beautiful and rich. And we'd already been ruined by the Vineyard guys. So that kind of song had kind of captivated our hearts. And so we came for a little while just to be in church, maybe volunteer, and then to go. And so we did, I don't know, we got to Sydney, we cooked chips at our first Hillsong conference and did New Christian things, and then just went to Donna and Darlene and went, can we volunteer? Like, what can we do?
Yeah.
And within, I guess, 3 months, I was on staff, and I think I got employed. And when I got employed, Donna Crouch, who was running the creative team at the time, said to me, I'm employing you because you're not creative.
Wow.
And I remember being so offended because I actually thought I was quite creative. I just wasn't creative like them.
Right, right.
And so I came on staff and started to run worked in creative on a little conference called Colour, a little bit with Darls and Russell Frager and Reuben, and as that was all starting to form. And then ended up planting our events department, our marketing department, different areas of church life.
Yeah.
And I think the creativity started. We would do things, and Sarah Morgan, who is my sister, and I, we would just empty our houses out every Thursday morning and bring everything beautiful to put on stage to begin to create a staging team.
Right. Gosh.
And so then
I'm shocked that Hillsong didn't have a staging team at that point.
That's 20 years ago, right? 25 years ago.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
So I know I look young, but like we were newly married, 20-year-olds, emptying out our houses, doing those sort of things.
Yeah.
And then slowly over time, we were just involved in putting on the events. And so dreaming about what it looks like for the kingdom to come on earth, and how do you show that in a visual way. And that kind of permeated all kinds of things until Dals decided she didn't want to run the department anymore. Reuben and Joel took over. And I have an HR degree. So the two boys reached out and went, can you help us to kind of reformat what we do here? We're not sure that everybody's in the right place at the right time. And so I got involved actually to start with on staff in the right places, doing the right jobs.
It's putting people in those particular jobs.
Yeah.
Wow.
As in just working out who should be where.
Yeah.
Because I guess Darl's special talent was worship leading, not necessarily running a creative team.
Yeah.
And I think one of my special talents is people and working out how to get the best out of them and how to see the gold and how to harvest it and mine for it. And there's a beautiful thing that happens when you don't have to be the one who's doing the worship leading. You don't have to be the songwriter. You don't have to be the production chief.
Yeah.
Because then you can look at the team really objectively and go, what helps us kick a goal this morning? What's going to work for you? What's going to work for us?
I didn't realize that that's what you started doing there first. I don't know that I've ever heard about a church actually hiring someone to find the correct people. I mean, like, I think that's called something else, but not like this. Not like, finding, when you said finding the gold and harvesting it, that's like, not, I don't know that that's really church language.
Mining diamonds, right? Don't you?
Should be, but
yeah. And I think in churches, everybody, I don't know. I find at the moment, everybody wants Brooke Ledgerwood. Everybody wants Ruben Morgan. Everybody wants Ben Fielding. But nobody wants the diamond in the rough that they actually have to invest in and train and develop. And everybody wants a unicorn. And I think my job at the time was to go, we don't have what we need yet, but the Lord's trusted us with people. How do we develop them and bring out the best in them and put them in play in a way that helps them?
That's stunning.
And us.
That's stunning. Did you find that job easy or hard?
I loved it.
You loved it.
So, yeah, because it was sitting around tables talking to people about what God had put in them and where they saw themselves fitting, and then beginning to look for the things that we didn't have and put together a jigsaw puzzle of all the right pieces.
Yeah.
And I think because we came in after Dales, we were in a really unique position to go, God was doing some things. And so we could kind of see what he was shaping, but it wasn't fully developed at the time. So there was an opportunity to actually kind of foresee the future with what was in your hand, but not quite be there yet.
Well, when you start getting to the point in a church like that keeps growing and growing and growing and growing, and then your budget gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, is that the thing that almost like takes you? I mean, you would think because of the budget, it would take you from one spectrum to another, because as you're dreaming along the way, there's something beautiful about the organic. I've always loved the beauty in the organic. And like you said, emptying out your house, on Thursday mornings to try to like stage it. I mean, I did that with Dive for 14 years. It was like load up the car, because I couldn't buy what I wanted to buy for the school because we had to tear down all the time. I wanted the facility that one day I would build and have all the beautiful things. But in the process, I learned more about what it was I was built to do, tearing down and setting up and tearing down and setting up. When you have the big budget, what does that do for you?
No, I think there's something beautiful about the restrictions.
Yeah.
Because I think creativity thrives in restriction.
Yeah.
Limitations actually are like canvas boundaries, right? That you can then paint on. But when you have everything that you need, it's difficult as well. I think the truth is, Rita, I don't think we ever had the budgets we needed to do what we did.
Wow.
So every time we thought we had what we needed, we would grow. And so you would end up like most of our people were volunteers. Most of our teams were run by people who had Monday to Friday jobs but were serving on Sundays. And we had 30 campuses in Australia and 30 campuses globally. So you're constantly going, you can't staff that, you can't resource that. But when it came to like conference openers and creativity, we did have money to use for those things. And therefore there was a joy in creating, because you could go, what's possible?
Yeah.
It's not just a couple of people carrying candles in. We can actually dream about how to make the story of Jesus come alive in a different way for people.
Yeah.
And there is a beauty in being able to construct the kinds of teams that are incredibly talented at their fields and able to showcase something differently.
Yeah.
And I look back on that season with joy, because I think what we were able to do was put a diamond out there and go, can you see Jesus? What about now? What about now? What about now? And every time we would create an opener or a creative piece or something, it was hoping to give people a different glimpse of what he was like and showcase different elements of his character and his nature.
Didn't you find though, because I remember being in Dallas when you did, I think it was the first actual creative conference that you put on that was different than Color, right? Because wasn't it just called Creative or Create?
Yeah.
And
it was just the worship and creative conference.
Yeah. And it was the first one that you guys put on.
That's the funnest one.
Yes. And you sent me a private link. And I'm not someone that lives in any kind of envy. I just never have. I'd get bummed out for certain things, but I remember just the deep, almost like sorrowful envy, because I was seeing happen in that conference. I just feel like that conference was so significant and so special with what you were doing, because I was feeling the presence of the Lord in the way that he had told me so many years before that he wanted to be felt in the arts.
Yeah.
And I was feeling this encounter happen, and I was feeling harvest. And I was like, I was in my kitchen watching it on, at the kitchen table. And I remember just thinking, I wish that I could see this because I was spending still then all this time working in creating Dive, pulling these artisans and these artists and these photographers and these actors and whatever, and trying just to tell them for a week that they mattered.
Yeah.
And to try to just make sure that they didn't run out of the church because the church didn't see that they had any value. And here I was watching this conference. When you put that first conference on, did you feel like it was like almost the beginning of an end of something for you, or you were going to have to be where you were? Because it felt like that conference hit something, Cass, like it hit something. And then it wasn't but a few years later. I mean, you did a couple of them, right?
Yeah.
And tell me a little bit about that, getting that conference together, because that was phenomenal.
If you're allowed to have favorite things you've ever done in life, I think that would be mine. Wow. I felt like that was like curating an art gallery. It was beautiful. And it was one of the ones, when you talk about no budget, we had no budget for that. That had limitations on it like nothing, but it was a playground for the artists and the creatives at Hillsong Church. And it was a passion project for each of us. And I just watched a whole team of people come together and just offer what was in their hands. And they would spend hours after work working on things, and they would dream up different ways of telling the story of Jesus. They would imagine what this could look like. And when we first put it on, we weren't sure who would come. We thought maybe 300 people would come. And as we cast the invitation and the vision, people came from everywhere. Yeah. And we were so struck by those verses in Galatians that say, each of you must do your creative best with your life, make a careful exploration of what you've been given to do, and then sink yourself into that. And allowing creatives to understand that they have a mandate from God to use their creativity to his glory was actually amazing. That first conference, I was so struck by the thought that God puts in our hands a story and a gift, and you kind of bring them together, and that gives him glory. And it's kind of working out, how do we mobilize artists and creatives and songwriters to sense that? Yeah. And so we just played. We literally just had a wonderful time dreaming.
Yeah.
And I can remember talking to JD and Brooke and those guys, and we were like, well, what does it look like for worship to have freedom in these spaces, not just a 20 minutes in the service, but to actually allow people room to breathe? And we did our first Midnight Massive. And I can remember just sitting somewhere, I felt like the Lord, when I want to return people to their first love. And I was like, I don't know how you're going to do that, Lord, but like, we'll create whatever environments you need us to for you to do that. And that night, Brooke just began to lead, and she took everybody back to old songs, like all the songs that I feel like we sang when we first fell in love with Jesus. And that night I just sensed him almost bringing red roses back to everybody. And in the room after the night, everybody told about moments where they remembered their first love.
Wow.
And so you kind of watch the Lord right on the back of creativity.
Yeah.
And it was spectacular. It was actually just beautiful. We were allowed to tell the stories however we wanted to. Nobody was confined to a certain way of preaching or a certain style of worship. And so for 2.5 days, we just played and had workshops and let people touch and feel and do and engage with the arts.
What do you think conferences like that and Renaissance and other events that, I know I did one last year here, a smaller event here, a creative event, because churches, there are churches or organizations like nonprofit Christian organizations that put on these events.
Right.
And, me living in Nashville, there's always something creative going on around Nashville.
For sure.
What is it about that very thing? Because I want to pick your brain about this, the theology of it for just a minute, because, when you're listening to the Lord, I mean, isn't that creative in and of itself, right? It's like the way that I hear from the Lord, the way that the Lord and I work things out together, the way people will always say, it's so interesting the way that you talk to the Lord. And I'm like, well, it's super creative, but that's, that's how I That's how I move and live and breathe. Like, I'm not going to talk to him like he's a priest. I'm going to talk to him like he's a friend because he became my friend. And I can talk to him like a father because he became my
Yeah.
father. And talking to him as an artist because he's an artist. And, and other people not really having that encounter. But then when you're working with young kids and you're working with young artists and you're watching their lives almost explode in color when they realize that they were given that thing that they have and that desire by the Creator, and that there's a place for it in the church if we're not detailing that that's the building called the church. Work that out with me on your side, the theology of all that.
Yeah. I get, you start in Genesis, right? And the Creator creates, like it is the way that he reveals himself. He's creating light, sound, color, animals, and he is hiding things in the depth of the sea, not even knowing if we'll ever discover them for his glory and majesty. I don't know, for his amusement, I wonder how many things he knows about that we don't know about, that he is just creating beauty and hiding it everywhere. And then I think he's done that in us. He's created humans to create with beauty that is about to surprise and delight the world. And I wonder if he just spends his whole time going, I wonder when the lights will come on for them, when this is going to take effect, when it will come into play in the earth and what it will produce. And I think creativity belongs in the church for sure. I love Queen of Sheba's story where she comes into the temple and everything's more beautiful than she ever imagined. Like the stories about what they told pale into contrast to what she sees. And I guess my hope is as people walk into our churches, that's their experience, that it's more beautiful than they imagine. And I guess not just the creativity, but the people. Like I think one of the most creative things that we can do is actually disciple the creatives so that their lives are beautiful, not just the outpouring of them. But I think outside of the church too, if we can see ourselves as the church on mission inside the church, so yes, with screens and art and music and photography and design and all of that sort of stuff to create a picture of what it looks like to live in community and into the story. But then if we can commission those artists and songwriters and poets and prophets to go and create in the world, then I think the church expands her borders. She's not a building. She's a people. I think of that creative conference one year. A girl came from China and she'd heard about, we used to do a 100-day creative challenge over the summer where we wouldn't meet together in creative community, but we would tell our people to be on mission for the summer and every day to create something for 100 days and just see what God did with it. Just commit to the craft and to the discipline.
Yeah.
And so they would all do things for 100 days and then we'd get back together again after summer and they would show and tell what they'd been working on. And there was songs and paintings and beauty. And people started out of that exercise, consulting businesses and web design companies and photography studios. And it was really fun to watch the Lord breathe on it. But somehow a girl in Shanghai got a copy of the message. And so for 100 days, she painted. And she painted our stories, the burning bush, the Red Sea, all of the Old Testament, Elijah in the cave and up into water into wine. She painted all these pictures. And then she hired a studio downtown Shanghai. And she put all the art up. And in a place where you're not allowed to tell the gospel, she allowed people to experience the art and the stories and the beauty. People were weeping in front of these pictures as they encountered God.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I feel like if artists can see themselves as the church on mission, then potentially they become some of the greatest evangelists that the world's ever seen. Filmmakers, storytellers, poets. There is a place for creativity out there and inside the church.
Hey, everybody, I want to take a minute to talk to those of you and encourage those of you who maybe you're planting a church, you're on staff at a church, you're in the children's department of a church, and you run and oversee the curriculum at your kids' division of church. There is some friends of mine that have developed this curriculum that I just think it's the best curriculum for kids church out there. It's called Amazing Kids. It is a Bible-based, spirit-filled curriculum. I know these guys, they are incredible creatives. Connie and Tyler Bates are the genius behind this, and they just love serving kids and serving God in serving our kids. If this is something that your church is looking for, if it's something that you as a pastor of your children's department is looking for, an enriched Bible-based curriculum to bring to your children's department of your church or your church plant, this is something that I would highly recommend that you do. I fully believe and back what these guys do. My own kid was under it for years, and it's just the way that they're doing it right now is just beautiful. So you can find all that information if you go to amazing.kids, and there's a kind of a special discount code that you can get, or a promotional code that you can get if you type in Rita in the promotional area of that, and they'll give you special pricing on that. But it's something that I just highly recommend. And kids are so important. They're so important in our churches. What we do when we drop our kids off in church and what's happening in the Sunday school area is so important for your children. And this curriculum is one of the best, and you will love it for your church. So check that out. It's incredible, and I back it 100%. I could not even agree with you more. It makes me think of, it's got to be over 20 years ago, but I don't dream very often, but I had a dream where I followed a ballet dancer in this dream from a young girl, and she just was phenomenal, but she just really loved the Lord. She just had this young love for the Lord. And when she was young, she felt like the Lord said, "You don't ever have to use your mouth to witness. I want you to use your feet. And you just dance, and I'll give you the power to dance, and you can dance, and people will know who I am." And in this dream, she ends up getting like into Juilliard at a young age, and she's dancing with the best. And then she's the youngest in the dream. She's the youngest dancer to get the lead role of Swan Lake in the New York City Ballet. And the dream ends with her coming onto the stage in that first night. And she emerges on the stage, and then the dream ends with the headline to the New York Times the next morning. And the headline said, "Young dancer takes stage in first opening night of Swan Lake." And people begin weeping and calling out on the name of the Lord, and they don't know why. And I woke up from that dream, and I was like, "What is this?" And he said, "That's what's coming." He's like, "That's what I'm going to do. That's that because that dream is so long ago. It's sometimes I say, I feel like Anna at the temple waiting for the Messiah, looking for the one I feel like that's kind of what I've been doing for the last 20 years, is just looking for the ones that will allow the Lord to just take their gifts and not necessarily be doing it in the church, but become like that. Yeah. Like that artist. Like I just believe that. But I think what is a bit of that causes the frustration in me is because it's and I know you've got to understand this. It's why I want your opinion on it. It's like there is this kind of thing in our church system where the artist is a scary thing. And entrusting the artist to something that is not in our programs or in what we've seen before is a very frightening thing for most churches. And so releasing the artist and some of them, they've got those tattoos and those piercings and sometimes they don't show up on time. And how do you guys speak into that, even now as pastors of a church? Because when you're pastoring artists, it is a whole different tribe. They are a whole different tribe. But I see different tribes in scripture. They're different personalities. Yeah. They're different people. But they all have these beautiful places that they are in the temple and that they're responsible for in the temple. Mm-hmm. How, as pastors, do you and Rich kind of go after this thing that is just there about the artist and that is kind of the mistrust of the misfits?
Yeah. We actually 6 months ago planted a church, and it is
crazy.
It's a beautiful, sweet community. We keep going. It's simple and beautiful. At the moment, it is not the biggest showcase of the arts or any of that sort of stuff. It is rich with community and relationship. And there are artists left, right, and center, some of the most talented people that I have ever seen in terms of designers and production team and songwriters, and that they're all sitting in the community. And I think at the moment we've gone really careful not to exploit their gifts and not to use them for our own advantage, but actually to dream together about how do we invite people into the story of Jesus. Like, how do we use the arts and the creativity, not necessarily how people expect, but how do we take them by surprise? And so we've started to imagine, like, what could communion look like if the artists were dreaming at the table? And so one of the first weeks we put on this huge communion charcuterie board with chandeliers and candles, and everybody came and they stood around the table and they told their salvation stories, and they rejoiced together about being found as sons and daughters. And there was music playing, and there was a warmth to it. And I remember standing there going, this might be one of the most creative things we've ever done. Like, it is so holy and so sacred, and it is so grounded in scripture, and everybody brought something to share, and it was beautiful. And I think part of this is to go to the misfits and those who are the artists. You're not on the fringes of the kingdom. You're right in the heart of the kingdom, and live worthy of the calling. Like, live into it, live up to it, and engage yourself in it. I think the danger becomes when we allow artists to become disenfranchised and to live on the edges of the church and think that they don't belong, that they're not actually the church.
Yeah.
And that could not be further from the truth. I think artists are commissioned to go into the world just like the business guys are, and the teachers are, and the lawyers are, and we make allowances for all of them. But often with the artists, I'm really careful, because we don't use anybody else's gifts the same way that we use the artist's gifts.
Yeah.
Right? I often think that in the church, we would never ask a lawyer to give their time free of charge and not pay them for their services.
Yeah.
And yet we do that every week with the creatives. And I'm not saying it's wrong to actually engage the creatives like that. I just think there is a value in what they're bringing to the table, and you have to understand that often lots of them do this as a job, and writing the tension of those things is a really real place to be in.
Yeah.
Whereas often I've watched pastors want to own the creatives and own everything that they do and use it for their own advantage, and I think that's difficult.
Yeah, and that's where I get a lot of.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do, and I feel like I'm counseling so many of them through that,
right?
Because after they're done in that being used in that thing, they don't even want to be used by the Lord anymore, and used isn't really the right word. I think whenever you're talking about the Lord, I don't think He uses us, but you know what I'm saying? It's like the gifts that God's given us in those creatives, in the creative things, when the church kind of like is done with you, done squeezing all the life out of you, and most of the time, sometimes it's not the right way to do it. You know, there's a massive community in Nashville of just artists and musicians that they just feel like they have no church, and they're longing and wanting a place to just gather to find community. But to try to go into a building, it's too hard for them to do that because of past circumstance or things like that. And then carrying their name into the building and then feeling like they're just going to get used for what it is they bring to the table. That's difficult.
And that, I have such tension and wrestle over that, because I feel it for artists, but I feel it for all of us. I think we've all felt, used. And at the same time, I felt so challenged, because I stood on every altar call as a little girl going, God, use me, use me, use me.
Yes.
Then I get used, and then I get upset about being used. And I think I have to manage who used me. Did the Lord? Yeah.
Yeah.
Did he do what I asked? Yes. Were there other people's names attached to that? And did they ask things of me that maybe were a lot? Yeah. But was there a joy in that at the time? Yeah. And did we see people come to know the Lord? And did he do things? Yes. And I think in this season in church life, it's really easy to look back on all of those things with negativity and go, gee, they hurt me.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, who hurt me and who did that to me? And what happened to me? I've been studying my master's, and I sat in a class on Acts, and we were talking about Stephen. And Stephen, who stands up and he proclaims the gospel, writes the best song if you want, leads worship, does this amazing thing, and they stone him and they kill him for his declaration of faith and for his boldness. And at that point in time, the church scatters, and like seeds are sown all over the world and bear fruit and become the church. And I'm like, maybe in this season, part of the hurt and the I felt used and my church collapsed or things didn't go according to plan is actually the Lord breathing seeds everywhere again, and he's sowing artists and musicians and songwriters and all sorts of people into different places. Yeah. And if we'll let him, he might start life all over again in different places, in different communities, doing different things.
Yeah, I think what I have loved seeing is that when stuff happens, like stuff is always going to happen, like tough stuff's always going to happen,
and always had, right?
Always has. It's just a different day, and some of it takes on a shade of a different color, and I think true authenticity, like true encounter with Jesus, makes you hungry for Jesus.
Oh yeah.
And if you're that hungry for Jesus, you're gonna start getting pretty discerning on what you're hearing, and if you're hearing something, because it's an unwinding. When I say I meet with a lot of artists where I'm hearing a lot of their trauma stories, it's like, okay, well, let's unwind the rope from around that pastor's neck. And let's unwind it, and let's realize that you took him and what he was saying, or her and what she was saying, as if that was Christ telling you that. That wasn't Christ telling you that. That wasn't Christ doing that to you. So you can't see the church through that person's, if you aren't willing to look at it through where Christ is actually at. And I think once I see people actually grab a hold of the authenticity of the true Jesus, like that's where true artistry comes out. And it doesn't matter if they're spit out.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if they're spit out. They're doing something. I mean, we are seeing in the last 10 to 15 years, we are seeing the American Idol worship leaders who showed up there and are entering into competitions and then doing things on the side. And then they went into film and there's like, I see seed everywhere that is the greater picture of the church than the local church down the street, or that big church over there, that big church over there. I've talked to so many brilliant painters who paint for galleries, and they don't paint Christian easy churches. They paint incredible paintings of all kinds of different things, but they paint because they've been influenced by the Holy Spirit to do it.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's what excites me when I see people carrying the authentic Jesus into the marketplace with their giftings.
Yeah.
And I'm like, there's the church. There's the harvest of the church in there.
And I think there's a caution for artists to not get enamored by their own gift.
Yeah.
Like, isn't that Lucifer and what happened in heaven? He was so enamored by his own ability and beauty and musicianship and that he thought he deserved to be worshipped. And I think that there's a real caution in terms of that and the story of Babel, building things to reach God or become like God, where sometimes our creativity can get away from us, and instead of us harnessing it for good, we allow it to build our own pride and our own self-importance and self-esteem. And I think that's where the caution sits. Yeah.
And I think the fear of, I mean, I remember way back in the Vineyard days, there was I forget the name of the band, but they were the worship leaders of a vineyard in Southern California, and they got a secular contract. And I remember I mean, a big secular contract with a mainstream record label, and their song was on the radio, and it was really going great. And I remember hearing all of this feedback with, "Oh no, we've lost another one. Oh no, we've lost another one." And as an up and coming mother at that time, I was like, "How come?" As a church, why aren't we like gathering around them and saying, if this is what you feel called to, then let us pray strength on you and pray encouragement on you and pray the hope of God on you and pray consistency and authentic Jesus on you so that you don't get lost in the shuffle, because we want you to go out there and do those things. And I realized that was one of the fine lines, that it's like, oh no, they went to the other side. And I'm like, aren't we supposed to go to the other side and preach the gospel?
That's been the challenge of where we've come from, is that I think we thought that it was the best intention for people to stay and be in church. They didn't have to go out to do this. And I think there was a real pure heart often in a lot of that conversation. But the wisdom of being able to look back goes, we were restricting people and holding people to things that maybe they didn't feel called to, that maybe the pastor felt called to. And I think you can't put your call on other people and hold them to it.
Yeah.
You have to keep going, what's Jesus got for them and where are they going to outwork that? Yeah. I'm with you 100%.
Yeah.
We've been having long conversations as we're planting, going, what should a church do and what doesn't a church do? And does a church have music labels? And should a church release songs? And how does art outwork itself in church? And what, how?
Yeah.
We're asking questions all over again, going, what does it mean for people to be safe in this environment and to feel supported and loved and esteemed and believed in and championed? And what do they do with the songs that they write? And are they actually just prayers for this community? And is it okay that we would never record anything and you would never know our name and you would never know their name? Is that okay?
I know it is. Isn't it kind of weird, especially in church planning, the church planning world, because everything, even in the industry, Cass, like even as an artist in the industry, somebody's already written some kind of manuscript that you just are like, we just all know we're supposed to kind of, then you do this. And then when it becomes like that, then you do that. And then then you do that and you get a record. And I've really been challenged by that, because it's like, is that what God is asking us to do? Is he asking me to do that? Is he asking me to sign with the label? Is he asking me to go down that journey? And I really think there are seasons when God says yes, because I remember God saying, so I want you to sign with that label. And then the label went belly up 6 months after I signed. And it was devastating. And I was like, I remember going back to the Lord being like, that's absolutely devastating. They've been asking me to sign with them for 20 years. I've signed with them and they just went belly up, but you told me to do it. I know you told me to do it. He said, I did tell you to do it. And I knew everything that was going to happen, but there's something I have for you to learn in the process. Are you willing to do that? And that's where I was like, oh, there's something God's going to do in me through this that's actually going to ride on my art and ride on my creativity and launch me to the next level. And it did. You know, I could have been bitter. I could have been angry. But I ended up letting it throw me into a whole different creative realm to get ready for the next thing God was doing. And I'm so glad I had that experience. Would I ever want to do it again? Probably not. But it is a hard thing to fight, Cass, because as a church planner, you know, it's like, well, when you get so big, you become a corporation and then you know what I'm saying? So
yes, but that's where I feel like creativity has something to give to the church, where even the way we think about things, it doesn't have to be what you've seen before. It doesn't have to be the same. I think God does different things in different seasons. I think he asks us to do things differently, and he lets us dream again and imagine again with him. And why do we just have to push play and repeat the same things that we've done every time? I think it's a different season in the church. I think the Lord is asking different things of each one of us.
Yeah.
And I think even like, I love what we did at Hillsong. Like I loved the beauty and helping people to imagine a big church and influence and all of those sort of things. I wouldn't be surprised now if the Lord is doing something totally different, going, let's do about little churches. Let's do about simple and beautiful. Let's take away all of the smoke and the mirrors and let's let authenticity reign. And then how do we get authentic with our creativity in a different way? And what about Jesus belongs in the now? And what does another generation need to see?
Yeah.
And I think that's fun. What should we be singing about Jesus now? Is it what we've always been singing, or is it different? What does it sound like to worship?
Do you ever get triggered by the bad experiences and you're just like, oh gosh, I don't want this to happen. I don't want this to happen.
For sure.
And then how do you talk yourself out of it?
I find myself in position from like, this is not what I want anymore. I think that's where I get triggered. I find myself in environments and I'm like, it's beautiful. It's just not, it's not what I feel called to build.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think then I just long to be home. Like where we're living at the moment, Reuben Morgan, who is a songwriter extraordinaire, he's the MD at the back of the stage for a whole pack of 16, 17, 18-year-old kids at the front of the stage.
Wow.
And it's fun because they don't know how to lead worship. They're learning and they're like, teach us. And he's like, no, why don't you I'll support you and I will have your back, but you lead. Take them on the paths that God's showing you. And it's really fun to reimagine that way. And I think when I get triggered, I think about, well, what does the new pathway look like? And
yeah.
What do we want to do here?
Yeah.
I don't think triggering's bad.
No.
I think triggering actually goes, what's broken in me that I actually need to heal? And why do I feel triggered by those things? And even for me, what did I do that caused that in people? Because obviously as a leader over areas, people are triggered by the way that we've led and the way that we have asked them to contribute. And so some of that is just honest self-reflection, going, Lord, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's all a learning curve, right? I mean, the being in the church, and it's like we are the church. So to stop being the church means we stop being. And
I remember walking on the beach at one point in time when I was really new in my job, and I felt like I was so disappointed in the church.
Yeah.
And certain leaders. And I was having a conversation with the Lord as I walked up and down the beach. And I'm like, I don't understand. I feel so broken. Like I remember crying as I was walking the beach because I just felt under so much pressure to perform and to do things. I remember the Lord just going, I'm not my church. I love my church. She's my bride. I'm perfect and she isn't. And I remember at that point in time just being so freed from expectations on people.
Yeah.
Going, this is going to be really messy because the church isn't perfect. She's full of people like me. And I'm a work in progress and I allow myself to be a work in progress, but I don't allow other people to be a work in progress. There's this really interesting study that I was reading last week and it says, we believe other people more capable of change than we believe ourselves to be.
Ugh, boy, isn't that the truth?
And I think, and I think we look at everybody and go, how come they're like that? And we make excuses for ourselves, but we don't allow them the same latitude.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think we just have to cut some slack and go, the church is not what hurt me. There are people in the church who hurt me. I have to work that out in relationship. Yeah. It's not an organization. It's relationship.
Yeah, it's always a bit shocking, especially recently. It's been really shocking to me how that simple thing you just said is so difficult for people. So difficult for people. It wasn't difficult for me, but I think I've always just seen Jesus separate from everybody else. And I haven't seen him morphed into the pastor. And while I understand hurt and pain and all those kinds of things, even as a creative and being misunderstood, so much of my life in the gift that I carried and the way that I carried it. I wasn't your norm, but I also think that when you're called to pioneer something, you're called to be something that nobody else is being, so that you could set the pace for what's coming. And that probably made it a little bit easier, but that's a very difficult thing for people to want to see. Yeah. Jesus by himself, I think so too. Not connected or morphed into the pastor or the person that hurt them. And I do think that is a challenge, but man, when you get that down, it's not like it's a piece of cake. It's just so much easy to separate.
Yeah, I think
it's just
so
so
too.
much easy to separate.
Yeah,
and move
and
on.
I think when you make a choice that we are called to be the church, whether you like it or not. Like, I think that has been, I feel like my whole life, it just continues to get reformed in me that it's not an option to pull out of church.
Yeah.
It's not Jesus or church, it's Jesus and church, and the church is us as the people of God. And he is doing something in salvation that is communal, not individual.
Yeah.
And so I find my place alongside all these people that have hurt me and fractured me and broken me. And in the community, there's healing.
Yeah, that's so good. Hey, everybody, this is Rita Springer. Thank you so much for coming in and joining me on the podcast here with Worship is My Weapon. There's a lot of things I'm doing right now. And one of the things that we provide alongside this podcast is a newsletter that we do that we send out to those of you that are subscribed, where I just answer questions and kind of give you information. And sometimes you guys are able to write in with questions that you just are curious about. We love that. We love that interaction. I actually love to interact with those of you that want something a little bit more beyond the podcast. So if that's you, make sure to get our newsletter, sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the newsletter, and stay in touch with all the things that we're doing here on the podcast in that newsletter. Let me ask you a couple more questions. Like when you look, are you the kind of person that will look like 5 to 10 years down the road and say, man, this is what I would love to see happen in the creative arts down the road in the church? Do you ever I would assume that you do that because I do it all the time.
Yes, and I don't know whether part of my yes and is I don't want to get disappointed if we don't get there.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah.
And I don't want to imagine ahead of God.
That's actually really great. I don't want to imagine ahead of God.
I want to walk in step and I want to walk behind him and I want to make sure that I'm following where he's leading.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I can imagine. And I think my imagination is I'm more inclined to look back.
Yeah.
And go, God, how do we tread these ancient paths again? How do we release the creatives to be prophets in society, to paint these pictures of what it looks like to live within the realm of your kingdom?
Yeah.
Like I love the prophets when they're just standing up with poetry, just going, this is what it looks like when God's king. And I imagine a time when the artists are actually just talking about what does it look like to live into God's kingdom? What does it look like for justice to roll and like rivers and mercy and like what does that look like? And when they begin to paint the pictures and tell the stories, then I think we become alive as a community.
Yeah. Wow.
I imagine more prophetic imagination than what we see now. I imagine different ways of describing this story in all of its beauty and splendor. And I see that in terms of where it is and what it looks like. I don't know.
Do you think that there are arts that are undiscovered? Like artistic ways undiscovered that we're going to find like those fish deep in the bottom of the ocean that nobody's found yet?
Yeah. And don't you long for recovery of like, we were in Europe last year. And I just remember walking around the cathedrals going, where is the architecture like this?
I know.
To the glory of God. And like, I don't want just commercials that are effective, but like the most beautiful stories and like.
Yeah.
I remember talking to a friend who was in Mosul and the war was going on. And when the soldiers came in, they just got rid of all of the art in society. They burnt all the books, they tore down all the paintings, they got rid of all the songs. And they said that was the greatest way to remove culture and to remove the heart of the nation. And that made me think lots about like kingdom creation and the kinds of things that we create that actually speak to a different culture in a different way. And just like justice is meant to mark us, I think that the arts could actually tell the story of the kinds of people that God is calling, the way that he loves the marginalized and the broken, the way that he gathers us, the way that he loves us. And I think that society needs a much more compelling picture of the church at the moment. I think we have been known for what we're not for and how we feel about certain people, and particularly in America. You Americans are wired. We stand up to things, you put nails in people's coffins, and it feels like we as the church can be so judgmental about these. But maybe art sneaks around the back door. Maybe it has a way of actually just creating and showcasing a whole other way of being human and being Christian that becomes compelling for people.
That's amazing.
And I think to talk to you about what I see in 10 years, it's the artists telling the story of Jesus in a way that just shocks the world again.
Wow. I talk all the time to people. It's kind of like probably my thing, but I talk about the difference between gifts and burning. Have you ever heard me talk about that?
Yes.
So I ask everybody who comes on the show, most everybody who comes on the show, what their burning is. So your gifts have nothing to do with like the epicenter of what God put in you to burn for. Like for me, it's courage. I was knit in my mother's womb with this wick to burn of courage, and it's wrapped in everything that I do. Encouragement is wrapped in everything I do. So my greatest attack has always been discouragement, because it's usually the opposite. It'll hit you the opposite. So if somebody burns for healing, they're usually sick all the time, either physically or spiritually or mentally or whatever. If someone really feels like they're burning with acceptance, they struggle with rejection their whole life. Or somebody that has truth, you can see lies, kind of riddling throughout their life. What would you say that you burn for and that you have been burning for years? Because it's something that when you walk into a room, Cass, you leave that in a room.
I think mine are beauty and imagination.
Wow.
I think
that's stunning. I mean, that totally makes sense. That totally makes sense about you. That's awesome. And when you think about that, is that what you want to deposit in the church more than anything?
Oh, yeah.
Beauty and imagination. That's awesome. That's
without
great.
a shadow of a doubt. Like, we've been talking in this season about the quest for excellence in the church.
Yeah.
Like, I'm so sick of excellence, because I think it drives us towards this performance and toward everything being just right and a harshness. And like, I think what I've longed for my whole life and why I was drawn to excellence is because I love beauty. Like, and I think it's the beauty that I long for much more so than the excellence. I long for those aha moments where the penny drops from Hebrew.
Yeah.
And I long for God to breathe on things that we imagine He can in a way that captivates us. Like, my whole life are stories of imagining something in a room and then just watching God breathe on it and cause beauty to come. So like, we've had the most ridiculous moments where at one point in time we hand wrote 5,000 letters to conference delegates coming to the Worship and Creative Conference. And I remember getting to the final Thursday night before conference. I think there's still 300 letters left to write. Oh, and I was like, oh, this is crazy. But I had in my heart, God, imagine if we could just write words from you and put them on people's chairs. Just maybe you'll line them up with the right people and they'll see you on the first night as they open this letter that says whatever it says.
Yeah.
And I got to the point where I was just like literally scribbling these prayers to people, and I didn't know what to write anymore. So I wrote the prayer I pray over my son every night. I'm like, may the Lord bless him, keep him, make his face shine upon you, lift up the light of his countenance upon you, and dig your peace. And then I would say all these random things to Tom as I was walking out of the room. And so I wrote the random things, and I said to the Lord, Lord, may this land on somebody's Tom's chair. Lord, take this, and for somebody else's Tom, may this be a blessing to them. And we gave all these letters to the events department, and they took them and they shuffled them, and then they put them out on all the seats. And there was a guy who came to conference, and he was contemplating a move to Austin. And he's like, Lord, speak to me when I come to Creative Conference. He opens his letter up and he starts reading it. And the letter is Love Austin, one of the guys in our team. That's not even a name in Australia. That's an American import that we must have had in our college. The guy knew when he opened the letter that the Lord was sending him to Austin. And then another girl opened the letter, and there was a verse in there that had been the verse that had been her life verse. And we're walking across the car park at the end of the night, and I've got my arm around my son and daughter, and we're just chatting about opening night of conference. And Tom just produces this note, and he goes, Mum, did you write my prayer to everybody? And I burst into tears, and I'm like, God, how do you do that?
That is insane.
Letters, write things, and trust it in your keeping, and you line up this. How do you take my letter to somebody's Tom and you give it to my Tom? And I'm like, I think my life in creative has just been that over. It's been sitting around tables with a team, dreaming and imagining what God might want to do, putting something in his hand and watching him just seed our expectations with it. And you would have story after story.
Oh, yeah.
You've written, and like I can remember Rubes writing a song about still when the oceans rise and thunders roar, I saw you above the storm, Father, King over the flood. I'll be still and know you are God. And everywhere we went, people would go. I was clutching to a tree in the middle of Hurricane Katrina. Yeah. And that song was going around my head. I lost family in a flood, and I stood in church that Sunday morning and I sang that. And you're like, God, I don't know how you did it, but we imagined a song in a room and you breathed life by your spirit into it. And the creativity on that just came alive and created beauty in people's lives.
Wow.
And that, like, if I burn for anything, it's that.
Wow. Oh, it's so good. That's why I'm still here. It's for the stories.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And then I go, let's go again.
I know, that's what keeps you going.
Generation.
I remember my best friend Kim would help me with the dive school, and we would get done and we'd be exhausted at the end of the week. But we would have seen God do these insane things, and we'd look at each other and we would be like, who's going to believe us if we try to talk about this?
Oh, yeah.
You know, who's going to believe us? And then we would do it all over again and go through all of the body aches and pains again to do it, just to get to those stories. So that's amazing.
I keep in my notes file just stories.
Yeah. They are. They're boomerangs to come back and hit you all the time in remembrance that God is who he says he is.
Yeah.
So. Well, thanks so much, Cass, for being a part of this. Next time you come to America, please, let's get together.
Deal.
All
Deal.
Right.
Can't wait.
Sounds so good.